Beginning with the Gemara, Mesechta Rosh Hashana. Yesterday, I wasn't here. They say that the way a jury works is that you have, when you go to trial, you're being judged by 12 people who aren't smart enough to get off of jury duty. As they say. We're holding the Gemara in here Mesechta Rosh Hashana Daf Beis. We yesterday went through the 4 different Rosh Hashanas that are on the calendar. Just for some reference, I'll put it up here on the screen. A little animation, which is a cartoon of it. And we said the story of Rabbi Chaim and the 5th Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara is now going to go through all these Rosh Hashanahs one by one. There's Rosh Hashanah for kings, which is on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. In every single document, it had to say the reign of the king, to the year of the reign of the king. Because as we'll see in the Gemara, if you have a document, a shtar, saying Ruvain owes Shimon $100, and he has to pay back by Zayin Cheshvan. If it doesn't say a year, person could say it means next year, 2 years, 10 years. You need to write the year, and the custom has been to write the year from the creation of the world. But the custom has been, out of respect and perhaps fear of the monarchy, to write what year of the reign of that king it was. So that begins on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So even if a king was coronated, became a king in middle of Adar, few days before the 1st of Nisan, he begins the 2nd year of his reign on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. The 2nd Rosh Hashanah is the 1st of Elul, for Meiser Behema, the 10th of every 10th animal that every person owns in Eretz Yisrael, to give to the Beis HaMikdash. The 3rd Rosh Hashanah is the Rosh Hashanah on the 1st of Tishrei, which is when every single individual and every single person and being that exists passes in front of Hashem as sheep pass in front of their owners, and Hashem judges us. And Rosh Hashanah for new trees, according to Beis Hillel, is on the 15th of Shvat. According to Beis Shammai, it's on the 1st of Shvat. And what's interesting is that on all of these Rosh Hashanahs, you don't say Tachnun. While the other ones, Nisan and Tishrei, are month of Nisan, you don't say Tachnun. Tishrei, you don't say Tachnun. Rosh Chodesh Shvat and Rosh Chodesh Elul, you don't say Tachnun. And Chamisha Asar B'Shvat, you don't say Tachnun. Now, although there is no real differences in halacha, and let's say on the 15th of Shvat, but being, as the Mishnah calls it, a Rosh Hashanah, we don't say Tachnun on it, particularly, as we know nowadays, especially with the advent of so many Mamarim and Chassidus, the specialty of the 15th of Shvat, and we don't say Tachnun, and if there is a public fast that is scheduled, communal fast for the 15th of Shvat or the 15th of Elul, there's many poskim which say that you don't even fast, it will be Bahab or something else on those days, because of its specialty, and because you don't say Tachnun on those days. So we have these 4 Rosh Hashanahs. The first one, the Gemara will discuss, is Rosh Hashanah, a new year for a king, which is on the 1st of Nisan. There's a very interesting shot on this Mishnah from one of the first Vishnusei Rebbes, who says that these Rosh Hashanahs, the 4 Rosh Hashanahs, correspond to the 4 different years, life cycles of a person. He says, the Rosh Hashanah, the 1st Elul, the Rosh Hashanah for Meiser Behema, for the 10th for your animals. So the beginning of a person's life, they're always looking forward. You're like sort of like an animal. Give me this, give me that. Don't really take others into consideration. Then the second Rosh Hashanah is Rosh Hashanah for trees. Is Rosh Hashanah for years, which is a person always thinking to himself, how am I going to get ahead in life? How am I going to make more money? Third Rosh Hashanah is Rosh Hashanah for trees, which is the next 20 years of a person's life. So after the age of 20 to 40, person's always working, how can I get ahead? From the age of 40 to 60, many people's parents are older then, and then they are spending a lot of time and energy taking care of their parents. That's the new year for trees, where you come from, the source that you always have to grow. People are always worried, how will I take care of my parents? Who will take care of them? And then the next Rosh Hashanah is Rosh Hashanah for kings and Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and that's when a person is from the age of 60 to 80, and then they have to think to themselves, I'm going to meet my king. I'm going to meet Hashem soon. How will I have to prepare for meeting the king? And the idea is that a person always has to prepare for Rosh Hashanah all the time. So let's continue with the Gemara. If you have an art scroll, it should be on 2A2. The Mishnah mentioned, Shalom Aleichem, Mike, thank you for joining, thank you for coming. The Mishnah mentioned that on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first of Nisan, is Rosh Hashanah l'Melachim, Rosh Hashanah for kings. The new year of a king's rule begins on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Asks the Gemara, l'Melachim, l'ma hilchasa. Our Mishnah is not here just to tell us anecdotes. Why did the Chachamim establish a standard day for every single king, no matter when they became king? Let sort of like we have over here in the United States, in America, which the president always starts on January 20th. However, if a president dies, the next president begins on the day that he became president, on the day that the previous president dies. So why did the sages have to institute and establish a standard day? And what is a practical consequence for establishing a date from when the king's year of his rule, of his reign, begins? Says the Gemara. Shalom Aleichem, Mr. Nadich. Mike, Shalom Aleichem. So the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Chista, says Rav Chista, Lishtaris, it is necessary for determining when any legal document is valid. They always write the date of what year it is, and they write the year, not just what year from creation it is, but also the date of the year of the king, what year of the reign it is. I'll give you an example of a very old, famous document. It's called the Magna Carta, 1297. All of the rights that were guaranteed in there. And at the very end, it says, we hold these aforesaid rights and gifts to be right and welcome. In testimony, we have made these our letters patent, witnessed by Edward at Westminster on the 12th day of October, in the 25th year of our reign. So it's a common thing, even not just in the times of the Tanakh, but even more contemporary. And if you have a king in a country, you always need to mention and guarantee the king and to honor the king all the time. And so you write down in your documents a year of his reign, what year of the king's rule. It's the first year, the second year, the 10th year. And therefore, in order to make it standard, not confusing, they instituted one new year, one date, which the year of the reign of the king begins. So whether the king became a king on the last day of the month of Adar, or on the first day of the month of Nisan, the next Rosh Chodesh Nisan will always be the first. It will be the second year of the reign of the king. The Tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah in Mesechta Shavios, and in the year of Shemitah, in the 7th year of the cycle of 7 years, any debts a person owes to their fellow friend are canceled. Now, how would a person usually know that they owe something to somebody else? So usually they have a paper, say in the paper, a document, which says that I borrowed money on, let's say, Ches Elul, I need to pay it back until Yud Ches Elul. But if there's no year written in the document, the person could always say, hey, the document is, this was meant for a different year, I have to pay you back in a different year. Or, let's say it came Shemitah and now the debt was canceled. So then the lender could say, he only borrowed money from me after Shemitah, and therefore the debt is still valid. And today we do a pruzbul, we transfer the debt to Bezdin in order that people should not hesitate from lending money to their fellow. At the time we learned in a Brisa, Shtarei choiv hamukdamin pisulin, v'hamucharin kshedim. A predated document for a debt is invalid, and a post-dated document, promissory note, is valid. You have to, every document which says Ruvain owes Shimon $100, Shimon has to pay back $100 by this and this date. In order to make any shtar choiv, any document of a loan valid, you needed two edim, two witnesses. Even if you didn't have two witnesses, person A still has to pay back person B. However, if you had two witnesses, you could go to Beis Din and you could enforce that the person A has to pay back person B. And more than that, if person A owned any property of value, any objects or hard property, hard values like a property or a servant at the time of the loan, even if it was sold, there already is a lien on the property, and therefore the buyer has to pay back the loan. Similar to if you buy a house and there's outstanding taxes on the house, you have to pay the taxes on the house before you gain complete ownership of the title. So in a similar way, if there's two witnesses on the document, if there are two witnesses on a document of a loan, it creates a lien on any real property, real assets owned by the borrower to pay back the lender. If the date on the loan was written before, so for example, let's say I own a house and I sold the house on Beis Elul. Now on Gimel Elul, I borrowed money from somebody else, and then I said I'd pay back by a certain date. So not me. The borrower didn't have enough money to pay back at that time. They can't go back to the buyer, the purchaser of the property, because the purchaser of the property has no. The purchaser of the property, when he bought it, there was no lien, right? The borrower did not yet borrow money from the lender, and there's no lien on the property that was sold. However, the person borrowed money on Beis Elul, and let's say in the shtar, in the document of the loan, the person put a previous date, a date from a week or two before. Suddenly, without even knowing, this buyer who bought the property off the borrower before suddenly has a lien on his property, and now he has to sell his property, he has to pay back the lender he has to sell his property, pay back the lender, go take the borrower to court, right? And this is why whenever you buy a house, you pay a lot of money to have a title specialist to go through to make sure that there's no liens or open debts on the property. So therefore, if a document was discovered to be predated, the Chacham, our sages, stated that it is invalid, totally invalid, and it cannot be enforced at all. And even a loan which was given after the date, or even a sale which was done after the actual date of the loan, there's no liens whatsoever from this loan at all, from this document, because even with two witnesses, because the person predated the loan. So that's what it means. If I had a promissory note, which I wrote a date from a while before the actual loan, psulin, they are invalid. However, it's post-dated, ksherin, it is valid. Because such a note is not favorable for the malveh, for the lender. Because, let's say, person sold a property on Beis Elul, the person borrowed the money in Beis Elul, but when he sold the property on Gimel Elul, but the date on the loan is only Ches Elul, so then the borrower is losing any lien on the property that was sold after the date of the loan. The document now cannot be used to take any tangible assets from anybody. It limits the power of the lender. Any property sold by the borrower between the date of the loan and the date written in the shtar on the document can now have no lien written on them. So if the lender accepts such a note, he has to do his own due diligence, and he has to make sure that when he is lending money to someone, the date on the document has to be that day's date. He shouldn't write a later date. If he accepted a document and two witnesses signed for a later date, and consequently now the lender has lost a lien on a property that was sold by the borrower. It's the loive, it's a malvus, it's the lender's own fault for doing that, and he waives his right to exercise any lien on any properties sold between the date of the actual loan and the date written in the document. So therefore, the document, a post-dated promissory note is valid, but a predated promissory note is invalid. Tan Rabbanan. Our sages have taught us in a new brisa.
Excuse me, why would somebody post-date a promissory note?
Why would someone do that to themselves? I mean, there could be so many reasons why a person would want to do that. Perhaps the lender himself needs to show assets that he owns, so he has to show he has money in my account, and therefore he doesn't want to lend the money till a later date. Or I could think of a variety of reasons. Perhaps Bezdin is not in session that day. He wants to start it from a day when the Bezdin is in session.
Okay, thank you.
Right. It'll be interesting. I mean, if you look up the Gemara in Mesechta Bab Metzia, it goes more at length about this. Perhaps over there's more examples, which would also give another reason. A person should always do the MS. A person should always be straight, do ordentlich, do the correct thing, and not write something which is invalid, which is false. Because even if everything is good, but it has an appearance of falsehood. It's an old, Jewish witticism, the joke that we said in the shtetl, when there was mandatory army service, and it wasn't like in the U.S. Army where you had Aleph Institute and you had chaplains like Rabbi Eli Eshkrin taking care of all your Jewish needs. The army, the Russian army, which most the majority of the Jewish population of Europe was under the rule of Russian czars, Poland, Ukraine, Russia, and all the far-flung regions. And they're very anti-Semitic. And in order to get out of the army, people will go to the furthest extremes. They would never register someone as being born. They would falsify documents, and it was a very normal occurrence. It wasn't even considered to be something wrong, which is just a normal occurrence. Jews in the army was literally a danger of life for them. People used to borrow documents. Even the Rebbe's own even the Rebbe's own passport says that the Rebbe was born 7 years before he was actually born, 1895, before 1902, being that, who knows, for whatever purposes that was. Later on, of course, was corrected. But you couldn't really be Jewish in the Russian army. Shalom Aleichem, Yaakov! Thank you. So there was Yaakov, Shalom Aleichem, welcome. So a child was born, and the mother just had after she recovered and the baby was born, she runs to the Rav of the city, the rabbi of the city, and she says, Rebbe, what date should I write? What year should I write that my child was born? If I write that he was born 2 years later than he was actually born, it won't be, for the won't be good for the army. If I write that he's born 2 years earlier, then it won't be good for tax purposes. What should I do? So the rabbi tells her, maybe just write the truth, write the real answer. She says, oh, thank you, Rav. Thank you, Rav. It didn't even occur to me to do that. And so definitely a person should, when you're writing a shtar, writing a document, you should definitely write the correct date, because even if there's no financial dealings that are illicit going on, still it's an inaccurate document. It's a nirika sheker. It seems like falsehood. That's in halacha in Chesed Mishpat by the Ramah. Tanu Rabbanan. Our sages have taught us. We're going to talk about the new year for the king. The king's new year, you say this is the first year the king was king, the second year the king was king, as in many documents, as a document here on the screen, Magna Carta and thousands of other old documents have the year of the reign of the king. Had to be written in every single shtar, every single financial document, and every document pretty much had to have, besides for the year from creation, it also had the year of the reign of whatever king was at that time. And the Chacham and the sages gave a cutoff date of Echad ben Nisan, the first of Nisan. And we'll discuss why the first of Nisan, and we'll discuss what the practical implications are. Taner Rabban and our sages have taught us in a brisa. Melech, if there is a king, Sha'amad, he ascended to his throne, Be'esrim v'tisha be'adar, on the 29th day of Adar, which is one day before Rosh Chodesh Nisan, before the month of Nisan. Kiven she'egia echad ben Nisan, once the first day of Nisan arrives, Olsa loy shana. That one day is already considered to be an entire year. And already the very next day, he's counted as beginning the second year of his reign. However, if the king became king one day later, on the first of Nisan, he's not counted for an additional year towards his reign until the next Nisan arrives. So the difference of one day makes a difference in counting how many years you count towards his reign. And in this case, the first year does not end until he has ruled for an entire calendar year. Kamash Malan. From here we see the Nisan Rosh Hashana L'Melachim. The Nisan is Amar Mar. The master said when explaining this brisa, Melech she'amad b'eser v'tisha ba'adar, kivin shegia echad b'nisan asal shana. Now the Gemara is going to examine and deal with this brisa. You stated that if a king became a king on the 29th day of Adar, as soon as the first of Nisan arrives, the year is counted for them to be king. It's already the second year. Hakamash Milan, the Nisan Rosh Hashana L'Melachim, or turn the page now to 2b. Rabbi Ruddle, he said he was a teacher for many, many years. He says one of his first students, a brilliant boy, his name was Willie. Last name was Shakespeare. And when they were learning Mesechta Rosh Hashana, I learned the Mishnayos Rosh Hashana with Rabbi Ruddle. So this boy Willie asked him, Rabbi Ruddle, to be or not to be? So Kamash Malan, the Nisan Rosh Hashana L'Melachim. From here we learn that Nisan, the first of Nisan, is the beginning of the new year for a king. V'yoim echad b'shana chashav shana, and the first day of a year could be considered a new year. And if you have one day of the previous year, it's considered to be a complete year. Now, this is sort of just repeating what we know already. However, the Gemara here is sort of alluding to what we're going to have a Gemara in Daf Yud in another 9 pages from now, discussing this idea if one day of a year is counted as an entire year. Now, when you have a Gzeira D'Rabbanan, a rabbinical enactment, which, for example, writing the date of the king's, how many years it is since the king has been king in a shtar, in a legal document, is a total rabbinical enactment. So therefore they have the ability to say that one day equals a year. But later on we'll have a discussion about the Iraisa, if from the Torah, if you have a biblical obligation, could one day be considered to be an entire year or not? So we're going to have that in regards to planting a tree, and you could in Eretz Yisrael, in Israel, you can only eat a tree from the 4th year onwards, and so in order to, you count it from the day the tree was planted, or from how many Rosh Chodesh Tishreis or Rosh Chodesh Shvatz or Tu B'Shvatz pass by from the day of that tree, and that we'll discuss on Daf Yud. Continues the Gemara. If the king was appointed, as coronated, became a new king on the 1st of Nisan, so that he's not, that from then on, he's considered to be in his first year, and it's not counted as year number 2 until the next year Nisan arrives, a full calendar year. The Gemara asks, Pshita, obviously, what do you mean? You're trying to tell me that the year should end before Nisan? Why should you think the first year ends any earlier? It's not like a schoolboy trying to say, I wish the school would be over already. So why do we have to reiterate that the year is not over until the next Nisan? Obviously. Answers the Gemara, it is necessary for a case the imnu aleha me other. When the king was voted for, were counted. As Rashi says over here, there were sometimes the ministers of the king, after a king would die, they would vote which son of the king should be the next king, which one is deserving. Sometimes it was a younger brother, sometimes an older brother. As we see in Melachim, how many civil wars and the Jewish nation had one of the other, one king, one brother killing the other, parents, children, the mother, etc. But the ministers would many times vote who would be the next king. Now, just like over here in the U.S., the election takes place in October, in November, but the actual it's not until January of the next year, January 20th, that a new president becomes president. So in a similar sense, you might think to say that if a king was voted on by the ministers, right, it wasn't a popular vote, it wasn't the people voting, it was the ministers who voted. If the ministers voted for a new king, and they voted in the month of Adar, but the king only assumed office in the month of Nisan, maybe they wanted to make a big coronation ceremony, maybe something else happened, that you would think maybe I should start counting from when the king was voted in a similar way. So the election is on what day? November, I don't remember right day. November election day is November 5th, right? Usually November 5th. So if election day is on November 5th, so do you say that the person who became president is there a year in office, you count it from November 5th or from January 20th? The previous president, they say, is a lame duck from after the election until the end of until January 20th, they're a lame duck. They don't have much sway in the government. So you might think to say that the incoming president, let's count his years from the day he was elected. Now, over here in America, in the US, we're not Baruch Hashem, we're not a monarchy or dictatorship. We don't have that. You have to write in the shtar in every document in this year of this person's of this president's term. You don't have to write that. But when there's a Jewish king, you would write, and even a non-Jewish king, as we've seen over here. And there's even a machlokes between Rishonim. Do you count a year of a non-Jewish king from the first of Nisan or the day they became ascended? They became actually in power. So do you do it from the day they were voted in, or from the day they assumed power? So I would think to say the im no leme Adar, if the king was voted in by the ministers in the month of Adar, and therefore I would think that the first year began in Adar and the second year begins in Nisan. Perhaps his reign is considered to have begun in Adar. So the Kashma Mashmalan, the Brisa therefore informs us that this is not the case, and therefore he still starts in when he actually assumes the throne. So if a document is written in Adar after the second king came to his throne, it's dated with either the year of the deceased king or it's the first year of the new king, but it's not considered to be the first year to the exclusion, to meaning that after the first of Nisan should be coming a second year. The year so far was always being attributed to the previous king, and therefore one may date that document according to the date of either the king which died, or the king which is going to come to power in such a situation. If the king was voted on by the ministers in Adar and will only assume power in the month of Nisan. What's so special and unique about the month of Nisan? We're going to see soon in the Gemara. But it brings a pasuk, a verse, which connects the coronation, the ruling of Shlomi HaMelech with the years the Jews left Egypt. So the Jews left Egypt, Mitzrayim, in the month of Nisan, and it says Chodesh Haziv, the month that the Jews left Egypt, and they left in Nisan, so we count new kings from Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And Shlomi HaMelech was the first Jewish king, which you could say was a permanent Jewish king, because Shaul HaMelech, previously Shaul was, although he had a big, he was coronated in public, but he was only a one generation king. It didn't last. David HaMelech, became king in the midst of wars. The first king, Ben Melech, who was king over the entire Jewish people when he was anointed and became king, was Shlomi HaMelech. That's when the real first kingdom began for the Jewish people. We'll pause the Gemara over here, and we'll continue with like this. Sorry. Okay. Continue with Veyadaata Moskva. It's a picture I just happened to bring up over here. Anyone recognize this picture? Sorry. This is
Babel.
Yep. This is a famous painting by Peter, what's his name? Bruegel, I think. Of the Tower of Babel, how we envisioned it. How it actually looked, I'm not sure. Where it was, we know the valley where it was. The Gemara documents the remains of it that were still around, and where exactly it is, we're not sure. We're going to discuss the Tower of Babel, Mirz Hashem, today in the Maimer. So let's continue with this. So in Dovi's here, if you have the book, if you have the Sefer, we are starting. We're holding page 191. We're going to discuss Gilgulei Neshamas, reincarnations. Reincarnation is a very Jewish idea, and other places which bring it up. Most of them in a skewed sense. And we know, for example, our generation, we are Gilgulim, our Neshamas, our reincarnations of the generation of the Jews which left Mitzrayim, which left Egypt. Those Jews did not merit to go into Eretz Yisrael, into the Holy Land. And these are the first generation of Jews. Every one of their souls is a neshama klalis, a general soul, which included every soul in the future, Jewish soul branched off of them. Being as we are the last generation of the Gullus, last generation of exile, the first generation of Gula, the first generation of redemption. So those souls had to come back to this world again. And once again, we are neshama klalis, we're general souls. We have the ability to fix any problems that took place, not just for us, but in the past as well, for all generations. However, and the main issue, when the Jews left, when the Jews were in Egypt, they did not believe properly in Moshe Rabbeinu, in Moshe and Many of them did not want to listen to Moshe's news that Hashem is taking us out of Egypt because of the hardship of the exile. And so to fix that, our task is to fix that by having emunah, bitachon, belief in Hashem, and following the Moshe Rabbeinu, the tzaddik of our generation as well. However, and of course, Gilgulim, there are many hundreds of anecdotes, stories of certain tzaddikim which told certain people what their purpose was, what the Gilgul was, to fix a certain neshama, a certain soul, what their task, what their mission in the world was. A chassid of the Alter Rebbe was, during that time, the Jewish, they were suffering extreme poverty. Russia, Poland, the whole Pale of the Settlement, it was before the Pale of the Settlement, but they were suffering extreme poverty. And the Alter Rebbe, and the chassid came to the Alter Rebbe asking a bracha, a blessing, for to make a livelihood. And he said, in addition to being so poor, he said his wife is constantly nagging him all the time. And he came to the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe told him that our generation is a Gilgal, where we are reincarnations of the neshamas, of the souls of the Jewish people of the time of the first Beis HaMikdash. Now, the sin of the Jewish people during the major sin, and why the first Beis HaMikdash, why the first temple was destroyed, was avodah zarah, idol worship, bowing down to stone and wood. And every time a Jew, unfortunately, bow down, served an idol, and they were chayav misa, I'm saying they had a certain, they were liable to a penalty, to punishment, and they never received it. Therefore, the neshama had to come down again to this world. So the neshamas of our generations, of the Alter Rebbe's generation, came down to this world to rectify, fix all the mistakes of that generation of the time of the first Beis HaMikdash. And being, as it says, ani chashuv kameis, a poor person is as if they're dead. Yaakov Avinu, he gave away all his possessions and to Eliphaz consider him dead. People which are poor, many of them don't want to live life anymore. And he says, every time a Jew groans, a Jew sighs from their poverty, it alleviates, it redeems, or it ticks off, you could say, one of the chiyuv misas, one of the obligations that a person would have been, one of the liabilities that their neshama had, and from the serving of avodah zarah in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash. And he says, and that is why this generation, Alter Rebbe's generation, the Jewish people were so poor during that time. Perhaps that explains why they learned so much Torah as well. Right, so now our generation, we said, is a generation told by the Rebbe, or told by the Arizal as well, of the Jews who were in Egypt. Where did they come from? The Jews in Egypt, as a matter of fact, have a previous source. They themselves are also reincarnations, according to the Arizal and the Chaim, of the generation of the Tower of Babel. Generation which built the tower to get up, who wanted to go and rebel against Hashem. And it's an interesting case study. Many times you'll have an example, a story, a tzaddik, telling someone that their neshama, their soul, had to come down again to fix something from a previous Gilgal, previous life, or previous reincarnation. And as we learn in Chassidus, the biggest pain it could possibly be for a neshama, a soul, is to come down in a non-human form. Just think about it. A neshama, a soul, is custom designed to fit into a body. Imagine trying to put a foot into something in the shape of a frog or the shape of a chair. Similar to that, the neshama, which has to come down in a non-human form, It's a tremendous tsar for the body. And therefore, there's so many stories of Baal Shem Tov sent people to make a bracha on a cup of water, to elevate the neshama, his soul that was in that water. Generation of the Dar HaFlaga. Generation of, they were the great divide. Haflaga means schism, a divide. They were united, they got along with each other, but the Hashem had to split them up because they all united against Hashem. Similar to nowadays, all the nations of the world unite against the Jewish people, Hashem's chosen people. How is it possible for a country in the middle of Africa and South America, far away, tens of thousands of miles away? How could they be against the Jewish people? Well, every nation in the world joins the UN, and they're all consistently voting against the Jewish people, condemning them. At least in one thing, the nations of the world are united. They have one common enemy. So the generation of the Tower of Babel, this happened when Avram Avinu was 50 years old. Noach, I think, was still alive then. It says 8 years before Noach passed away. And they gathered together and said, look, Noach is so old, he's going to probably die soon. The generation which witnessed the flood is dying out. Who knows, Hashem might bring another flood to the world. Let us let's figure out how to save the world. We'll save the environment. Let's figure it out. Instead of relying upon Hashem, we have to do it ourselves because there's no one to help us but ourselves. And they said the first flood, the first Mabul, took place in the year 1656 from creation. So 1,656 years later is going to be another flood. The heavens will collapse, it's going to rain. Let's build supports to support the heavens. It shouldn't fall. It's one of the reasons they built it. Another one said, let's build it so people should remember us. It should be so tall, so big, that the next flood can't destroy it, and people should remember us. Another group said, let us build it so tall, as Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz says, who lived during the times of the Maggid Mizrich, 1700s. We'll go beyond this world. We'll have weightlessness. We'll be able to float, and we could wage war with Hashem. So they were not aware, they're not conscious that Hashem is in creation. All they saw was Elokim, concealment. They saw, look, the water is about the water is about to flood the world. That's all they saw. They saw a Dar HaFlaga. We're going to say a deeper explanation. Dar HaFlaga, the generation of the Flaga.
Dar HaFlaga.
Hello, yeah. You saying something?
Oh, sorry. We say in Hebrew it's Dor HaPalga. Yeah, I read about it. I just remember what you say. I just remember.
Yeah.
About Dor HaPalga, about all
Dar HaPlaga.
That I learned it long time ago.
All right. The Dar HaPlaga, exactly.
So, yeah.
Dar HaPlaga. So we're going to have a deeper understanding of the name Dar HaPlaga. Dar HaPlaga means Haflaga is divide. As a mimer, until now, we're learning over and saying this in one form and another form. It's on the words Veyadaata Hayom Hashavosah Elovachi. You should know today Ki Hashem Hu Elokim. Havaya, name of Hashem of Yud Kei Vav Kei, is Hu Elokim. It is Elokim. The name Elokim comes from the word Helem, to cover, where you don't see Hashem out here in the world. You look outside, you don't always see Hashem. It's hidden. You have to see Yud Kei Vav Kei, Hashem's name, which is the one who's always creating the world, and we have to look inside of it. And a Jew's task is to reveal, to look in for the part of Hashem which is hidden inside of creation. The generation of the flood, Dar HaPlaga, they were stuck. By them, Havaya, they had a pilug, they had a separation between the name of Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and the name Elokim. They couldn't fathom that Hashem is involved in this world. Really? You're telling me Hashem really cares what I do when I wake up and how many tomatoes I put on my omelet in the morning? Hashem really cares? And Hashem really cares how many apples are on every tree? They couldn't understand. They couldn't fathom that. They thought, Azava Vayata Ares Chas v'Shalom. God forbid that Hashem abandoned the world. And whatever happens in the world is at the mercy of science and nature. They believed in what they saw instead of looking for the light within. Baruch Hashem, a Jewish person who has an neshama, many times, especially, a person steps back and don't look at the last day. Look at the last 10 years. You realize how many supernatural things happened. Where you were 10 years ago to where you are today. One of the things of the generation of the flood, Hashem can't control the climate. Meaning, Hashem can't make the world have the best climate. We'll control the climate. We'll save the world. I mean, we see how erroneous it is then, but the same thing's happening today in many places around the world, in a different guise. The same idea, meaning that Havaya and Elikim are separate. Right? So we'll at least say a few lines inside. Umeyata, Sarach Lavin Shaychus Inyin Veyadaata Ki Havayahu Elikim. Yitzias Mitzrayim Knisat Haaretz. The Torah tells us, Hashem tells us, Chumash Devarim, Veyadaata Yom, you should know today, take it to heart, Havaya is Elikim. God is God. What does it mean, God is God? The name of Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the name which is beyond understanding, is Elokim, the nature of the world. Why do the Jewish people have to be told this before going into Eretz Yisrael, into the Holy Land? And what's the connection? It says, you should know that God who took you out of Egypt, the previous psukim, previous verses, you should know God took you out of Egypt, He's all powerful, and you should know today, before you go into Eretz Yisrael, that Havaya hu Elikim, God is God. Because these two things, leaving Egypt, entering Eretz Yisrael, Holy Land, then you can come to the awareness that Havaya Elikim are one. That concealment of the world is not a concealment to Hashem. Building a tall skyscraper, showing how strong you are, we're together, and together we're able to get through this. They believe that they're not at the mercy of Hashem, but the mercy of nature. And they figured out that if we band together, we have a higher chance of survival. They were completely oblivious to any spirituality. In order to fix that up, they had to come back into this world again. And there, when they came back into this world, they were steeped in the lowest lowest culture of the world, which is in Egypt. Came back as a Jewish people. So as a Jewish people in Egypt, a land full of klipa. They worshipped idols, they worshipped sheep, they worshipped animals. The way they ended their previous lifetimes was the way the Jewish people began their new lifetimes in Mitzrayim. Deeply involved and steeped in the worship of the superficial, what you see outside. Perhaps our generation, which goes back to then, has some of those aspects. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu had to bring the 10 plagues. Couldn't just take them out of Egypt. We had to show how nature is not in control, because it's Hashem who is in control and creating something every moment. So the 10 plagues, leaving Egypt, was not just to punish the Egyptians, but it was a lesson. It was a classroom by the greatest teacher of all. Who's the greatest teacher of all time? Hashem. And with that, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Yaakov.